The sun was setting over the small town of Riverton, casting long shadows across the streets as Linda Carter sat in her living room. It had been 27 years since her daughter, Emma, and her entire class had disappeared without a trace, leaving the town in a state of shock and disbelief. It was an event that had haunted Linda, a mother who never stopped searching for answers. Years had passed, but the pain never faded. Time had moved on, but Linda had never been able to move forward. Every anniversary of the disappearance was a painful reminder of the mystery that remained unsolved. Emma, her bright and curious daughter, was only 10 years old when she vanished along with her classmates during what was supposed to be a routine school field trip. The event was quickly swept under the rug. The investigation, as far as Linda could tell, was lackluster at best. The police were quick to call it a tragic incident, a failure of the school system, a mistake, a lost cause. The search ended, the media moved on, and the town pretended it had never happened. But for Linda, it was never over. She couldn't shake the image of her daughter's empty chair, the unanswered questions, and the chilling silence that followed. Linda had spent years combing through the town's public records, speaking with anyone who might remember something, anything, that could provide a clue. But nothing had ever surfaced. No new leads, no fresh information. The case grew cold, and as time wore on, Linda found herself more isolated, more desperate for answers. Then, one fateful evening, as Linda sat at her kitchen table flipping through old family photographs, something strange caught her eye. In the corner of a box, buried beneath mementos of Emma's childhood, Linda found a small, worn notebook. It wasn't Emma's. It wasn't even from someone she recognized at first glance, but the handwriting, cramped and rushed, sent a chill down her spine. The notebook belonged to Emma's best friend, Lily. Lily had been one of the children who disappeared with Emma. The notebook, with its faded pages and frayed edges, had somehow made its way into Linda's possession, tucked away in the corners of her home all these years. It was filled with typical school notes, doodles, and fleeting thoughts, but there was one particular entry that caught Linda off guard. It was written in the margins of a page, a short but cryptic note that read, "Don't trust them. The teachers know more than they say." Linda froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The note seemed insignificant at first, but as she reread it, a knot tightened in her stomach. What did it mean? Why would Lily, at such a young age, write something so ominous? What had she known? And most importantly, what did she know about the teachers? For years, Linda had trusted the authorities, the school, and the system. They had told her that they were doing everything they could. They had reassured her that they were investigating every angle. But now, this small, seemingly insignificant note opened up a terrifying new possibility. What if they hadn't been truthful with her? What if the teachers, the people who were supposed to protect her daughter, were hiding something? Linda's mind raced with questions, and she felt the familiar fire of determination reignite in her chest. This wasn't just a case of a missing child. It was something much darker, something deeper. Over the next few days, Linda pored over the notebook. She examined every word, every scribbled detail, hoping for more clues. But there was nothing else. No answers. No new information. Just that one chilling message. And yet, that was enough to propel her forward. Linda knew she couldn't stop now. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. The next step was to dig into the records again, this time with a new perspective. She went back to the police reports, the school records, and the local news clippings. Linda meticulously went through every document, examining them not for what they said, but for what they didn't say. She noticed something strange. One name kept coming up, a name she had overlooked before. It was a teacher who had been on the trip that day, their lead chaperone. His name was Mr. Thomas Grant. At first glance, his role seemed insignificant, just another teacher doing his job. But as Linda dug deeper, she realized that after the disappearance, Mr. Grant had been transferred suddenly and without explanation to a different school in another town. It was odd. Teachers transferred all the time, but it seemed suspicious, especially given the circumstances surrounding the disappearance. No one had ever mentioned this detail before. It was brushed aside as a coincidence, but Linda couldn't ignore it. She had to know more. Linda's search for Mr. Grant had become an obsession. For months, she followed every lead, retraced every step, and spoke to anyone who might have known something, anything, about the mysterious teacher who had been in charge of the field trip on that fateful day. The hunt was frustrating and full of dead ends. Most of the teachers and administrators involved had long disappeared, their whereabouts as elusive as the truth itself. The ones who were still in town seemed to have no answers, or worse, no desire to speak. Linda's heart would sink each time another lead crumbled to dust, but she refused to give up. Then, one morning, as she was scanning through the town's old public records, she found a name, Mrs. Jenkins. She had been a teacher at the school during the time of Emma's disappearance. Though she wasn't directly involved in the field trip, she was still a part of the school's fabric. Linda made a call, and after some back and forth, she managed to arrange a meeting. Mrs. Jenkins, now in her late 70s, was living a quiet life far from the noise of the school where she had once worked. Linda had no idea what to expect, but the possibility of uncovering something, anything, about Mr. Grant pushed her forward. The cafe where they met was quiet, tucked away in a corner of town. Mrs. Jenkins arrived early, her frail figure perched on a bench by the window, a look of deep thought etched on her face. When Linda sat down, the older woman's eyes flickered with a mixture of recognition and suspicion. She took a long moment to assess Linda, almost as if weighing the decision to speak. It was clear from the start that Mrs. Jenkins was no stranger to secrets. Linda didn't waste time. She knew this conversation was her best shot at uncovering the truth. "Mrs. Jenkins," she began softly, "I'm looking for answers about that field trip, about Mr. Grant and the others. What really happened to the children?" The older woman hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee, her eyes darting around the room. She looked over her shoulder, as though making sure no one was listening. Linda's heart raced with anticipation. Every moment felt crucial. "There were rumors," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice barely audible, as though speaking the words might bring unwanted attention. She leaned closer, her lips almost touching the edge of the table. "Nothing was ever proven, but there were whispers. Whispers about certain teachers being involved in things they shouldn't have been. I don't know what happened to those children, but I always suspected someone knew more. Much more." Linda's mind raced. Whispers. She had spent decades investigating, but never had she encountered something like this. Could the teachers have been involved in something darker than a field trip gone wrong? Could they have played a role in the children's disappearance? The idea seemed unfathomable, but with every word that Mrs. Jenkins spoke, it felt more and more like a possibility. Mrs. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes widening in sudden panic. "I shouldn't have said anything," she muttered, her voice shaky. "I don't know anything. I've heard things, but it's not my place to talk about it. You shouldn't be digging into this, Linda. It's dangerous." But Linda had heard enough. The confirmation, however fleeting, was all she needed. Her suspicions were correct. Something had been hidden, Something had been covered up, and she could feel the walls of the mystery closing in around her. Mrs. Jenkins may have been scared, but Linda's resolve only strengthened. Linda spent the next few months diving deeper into her investigation. She spoke to more former teachers, staff, and anyone else who might have had information. Each new conversation, every new clue, added weight to her growing suspicion that Emma's disappearance, and that of her classmates, was far from a simple mystery. It was a cover-up, a conspiracy that involved people in power, people Linda had trusted for years. The school had been hiding something dark. But what? And why? She scoured public records, legal documents, and even unofficial sources, piecing together fragments of a disturbing narrative. What she uncovered was chilling. There were whispers of a secret program, a covert operation involving the school system and children, specifically children who had been handpicked for special assignments. These weren't random students. Emma and her friends had been chosen for something far beyond any ordinary school field trip. But what was the purpose of these special assignments? Where had the children gone? Linda didn't have all the answers yet, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized that these questions had to be answered. One afternoon, as Linda was going through a stack of government documents she had managed to get her hands on, she found something that made her blood run cold. Hidden within the pages was a reference to a secret government program, one that had operated under the radar for decades. It was vague, but the more she read, the more certain she became. Emma and the other children hadn't just vanished. They had been taken, selected as part of an experiment. A government-sponsored program involving children. Testing, research, and psychological experiments. Linda's stomach twisted. The chilling reality was setting in. This wasn't just about a missing child. This was something far more sinister. The conspiracy ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. Then, Linda received an anonymous tip, a lead that would change everything. The caller had no name, but their information was credible. They pointed Linda to Peter Sullivan, a former government official who had been closely involved with the school and its administration during the time of the disappearance. Linda was skeptical at first, but the caller had given enough details to make her believe there was truth in what they said. Peter Sullivan knew something, perhaps everything. Linda arranged a meeting with Peter, unsure of what to expect. When she arrived at his home, a small, modest house on the outskirts of town, the air felt thick with the weight of the past. Peter greeted her with a somber expression, and for a moment, Linda wondered if he had been waiting for her all along. "Linda," he said quietly after a long pause, "I've known the truth for a long time. I couldn't say anything. The program, it wasn't just the school. It was bigger than that. The children were part of something they shouldn't have been involved in. Something that no one was ever supposed to know about." Linda listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest as Peter explained what had really happened. He spoke of a covert government program, one that had been running for years, using children for experiments and research that involved psychological manipulation and testing. It wasn't just an accident. The children had been chosen, and once they were taken, they were placed in a program that nobody outside the government and certain officials knew about. The weight of Peter's words hit Linda like a tidal wave. This was not a simple case of a missing class. Emma and the others had been part of something far more disturbing, a part of a larger operation that had been hidden for decades. The truth was more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. Peter's revelation left Linda shaken, but determined. She had the answers she had fought for so long to uncover. But what now? What was she supposed to do with this knowledge? Linda knew one thing for certain. The truth could no longer be kept hidden. The town, the authorities, the people who had covered this up, everyone involved had to be held accountable. The conspiracy, the lies, the experiments, all of it needed to be exposed. Linda Carter, a mother who had spent 27 years searching for her daughter, now found herself not just seeking justice for Emma, but for all the children who had been part of the hidden program. Her fight for justice was far from over. The world needed to know what had really happened, and Linda would not stop until every last piece of the puzzle was revealed. The silence of 27 years had been broken, and with it, Linda's quest for truth and justice had just begun.